Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, we'll be talking with a visionary in the field of conversational AI. Now, we've all been hearing about ChatGPT and the interesting things that it can be doing, but today we'll be talking on how conversational AI can make all the difference in the world when it comes to hyperautomation and the digital transformation programs that organizations are pursuing. Our special guest on this episode is Robb Wilson, founder and CEO of OneReach.ai, who has authored a riveting book on conversational AI called Invisible Machines, a practical guide to creating hyper-automated ecosystems and intelligent digital workers. And I highly recommend this book, by the way. It's very good. So we're going to be hearing from Robb about his thoughts on where conversational AI is going to make the most impact in your organization. So welcome, Robb.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. You have an interesting background, and can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got from the movie industry to founding a conversational AI platform?
Yeah, it's a journey. It started quite a while ago. The gray hairs kind of reveal that timeline. It's the film industry is pretty aggressive about technology. It's also very open-minded and takes a very creative approach. We can see that film and television, etc., it doesn't hold back. It really goes for it, right? It takes advantage of cutting-edge tech. It's already utilizing generative AI for 3D modeling and special effects and audio. So it just jumps in. And I think 10 years of that, of exploring and really focused around the human aspect, did a lot of dialogue replacement, like cutting syllables out of words and replacing it with syllables from similar words in other takes and stuff like that. So trying to put words in people's mouths and then just imagining a future where that's automatable. And I think it just evolved. I worked with technologies like the Avid and Fairlight for those audio files out there. Not too many people will remember the Fairlight, but it's like an old school synthesizer that's still around for its like iconic sound. So yeah, just always been in it. AOL buys Time Warner, that's where I worked. And I sort of moved from making movies to the internet. And then AI just captured me super early on.
I'm glad it did capture you early on because you've taken your experience and your background and you shaped it into this book, which again is fascinating. It's interesting because it reads from both a technical perspective, but it also introduces quite a lot of a human perspective and the perspective on humans within a digital transformation environment. So what drove you to write this book?
Yeah, so it's not my first book. I wrote a book for O'Reilly, an animal series book years ago. And so I was in no hurry to write a book. So it's not like one of those bucket list things for me at all. But there were two real drivers, I would say. One, I was just tired of repeating myself over and over again. So I could just say, here, read the book. Hours of talking and saying the same things is quite boring. Repetitive tasks are quite boring, ironically, as we'll get into further in this podcast, I'm sure. Including saying the same words over and over again. You could say that writing a book is a form of automation, right? I write down the words and ideas and I capture them. And this is years ago. The other thing that I probably am more in touch with now than I was at the time, I still was in touch with it, but now I look back with a lot more thoughtfulness. And that is, especially my personality, I'm not one to be hyperbolic. And I could see this future with conversation as an interface to machines, as a new UI, it being far more transformative than Windows was to the UI back in the day. And I knew it was going to affect all of our software, all of our jobs, all of our companies. But I found when I said it out loud years ago that people would their eyes would gloss over and you just sounded like a crazy person. So I found myself really toning it back, toning down what I really thought. I knew it was going to be major. I knew it was going to happen fast. I wanted to say it, but every time I did, I somewhat regretted it afterwards. And so I found myself just over the years toning back the futuristic nature of what I was saying. And I felt like if I had written a book about this, I could let it out. It was as a vehicle for kind of saying, hey guys, here's what's coming, and not having to at least see the eyes glaze over. At least I'm not in the room. So we're talking 3 years ago where we start writing about the future of NLU, essentially chat GPT, even though we didn't know who was going to do it. We knew it was going to happen. And so, yeah, writing it all down, not only the effect of NLU and large language models and generative AI, but also the commoditization of it, which we're seeing right now, which is that no one model will rule it all. This is not the world of one company dominating. This is something that's going to come fast and be available quickly. So yeah, that was it.
Well, I appreciate the way that you approached it because, again, there's a bunch of different ways that you look at the evolution and the technology piece, but again, much more in human perspective. And I would get that in a little bit, but in hyperautomation within the context of our broader IT industry tends to focus on the streamlining of processes. You mentioned getting out of those boring processes and whatnot. Yeah, cost reduction with some acknowledgments to some that made customer employee experience pieces. But how do you see hyperautomation? And one of the things you mentioned in the book, this China's the Ant Group story, which I thought was fabulous. I don't know if you can summarize or recount that because that really hit home the point quite well.
Yeah, and it's this financial services company, for those that don't know, that just did the same thing, the sort of spirit of the film industry, just embraced the tech. It ran towards it, didn't move cautiously, ran towards it, but then moved cautiously as it looked at how to deploy it. Fast at first and then cautious as it rolls it out. And it really was transformative for their business. It certainly moved the needle for their company. And I think it's interesting. I was talking to a couple of MIT professors that focused on robotics, so physical robots in factories. And one of the concepts they talk a lot about is this lights out automation, which is the idea that no humans, just pure automation going on. And they talk about lights out automation being a red herring. Like it's not worth chasing. We focus so much on automating the things we do today versus automating the things we ought to be doing and could be doing. And they dive quite deep into what actually happens when you start automating and seeing all the new things you can begin to do. And so hyperautomation is this idea of automating as much as you can, as fast as you can, but not to a lights out end, but to a raise the bar end, raise the bar on employee experience, raise the bar on customer service experience, raise the bar on product, and keep the lights on, but have humans focus themselves more on creativity than they do on productivity. And I think the fact I've just read recently, like 40% of the population is more scared of AI than optimistic about its benefits. Don't think the benefits outweigh the risk, which is a massive, massive amount of fear. And I think that's too bad because I think when you really look at what's actually happening, I'm not talking about the future. I'm talking about right now, when you look at companies like Ant, that it does create more space for creativity. And you could almost argue that it has been our focus on productivity that limits our imagination for how we can use that time that automation will give us. The fact that we think that we're going to turn the lights out and that's what we're going to do with automation just tells us we're focused not enough on creativity as human beings. Because come on, there's so many ways we can raise the bar.
So one of the things you mentioned is this concept of transferring the automation pieces to a point where you can liberate the humans to do their thing. You mentioned that just a moment ago. Do you see that this is leading us towards a renaissance? Because if you see you take away, so the 40% you mentioned who are afraid, okay, I'll maybe put some of the blame back on the film industry that you just came out of.
Yeah,
because
100%.
we've all seen everybody knows the Terminator kind of stories, right? But the storylines being what they are, obviously are creative interpretations of some dystopian, blah, 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 dystopic. I totally understand that. Some of the benefits may not necessarily be as as exciting to tell stories about because in fact they become blended or merged in with the fabric of our lives to a point where we really don't even see them anymore. So that you've hyper automated and
Hmm.
added AI to the point where when I say, "Hey, Alexa, what's the weather going to be like?" I don't think about all the magic that happens to get that. And I'm certainly not afraid of asking for what the weather report's going to be. That's not something I'm
Right.
fearful of, but I've taken it for
Yeah.
granted. So do you see that transition really opening up that renaissance? You mentioned creativity. Creativity, do you see that in the sense of, I would say more of an arts creativity, or do you see creativity more of a strategic viewpoint of how I'm doing business now? Or is it a combination of both?
I love that question. Yeah. How do I define creativity? I think somewhat uniquely. This conversation is creative in nature because neither of us is scripting. Back to my original point, we're not repeating ourselves over and over again every day. So to me, creativity is the act of improvisation and co-creativity is the act of doing it with other people. And I think that when we look at art and creativity, we look at it synchronously or asynchronously, right? In this moment, we're synchronously co creating. There's even science to back up the fact that as you're communicating with someone, the frequency of your voice starts to merge, which is super interesting. We actually start matching in frequency. So there's a mind meld sort of happening when two people are co creating or having a conversation together. And so if you consider that art and you think of the art of like painting or photography, a co-creation in essence, because every person that views the art finishes the art, right? In their minds. So they see what they see. And so every painting is a new painting and a unique painting, depending on the person that's looking at it, right? So that's just more asynchronous creativity. So if you look at creativity more broadly, you could probably consider it the substance of connection. So what is connection? It's co-creation, right? It's people improvising together, not people doing mundane tasks over and over again or repeating the same words over and over again. It's two people co-creating. And if that's creativity, then conversation is connection. And if that's really food for life, right? If we have exercise that we need and nutrients that we need from our food and socialization, and that is just co-creation, then we realize that machines can take those things that compete with connection away, these repetitive things, whether it's repeating the same words over and over again. Hi, how can I help you today? We did an experiment. We have a coffee shop that we opened up in our office to play around with the tech, and it's called Humans, interestingly enough, because the goal is, can we use technology to improve the connection to humans? And what's interesting is even though customers can order through a conversational AI, which they do, they walk up to the counter, they still have a conversation with the barista. But the difference is the conversation is not about, do you want soy milk, whole milk, or oat milk? So you don't have this repetitive conversation with the barista, especially from the barista standpoint. But the conversations become about other things, like what's happening in the world, or what's happening in the neighborhood, or what's happening in the space. So they're still talking, right? But now they're not talking about, hey, what kind of milk do you want? Because the barista knows because they placed their order. So the interchange is still happening. It's just more co-creation going on, which is stronger connection. And now you realize that people feel more connected to the place, the employees feel more connected to the customers and to each other. So I take this idea of creativity and broaden it to, it really is the substance of connectivity, which is something I think we need just like we need food.
So you made an interesting comment here regarding your experimental coffee shop here regarding the way that that all happens, right? The concept of interaction or transacting businesses has always been a personal thing. Scroll back in time prior to computers, people would go to their hardware store and talk to someone and ask them about
Right.
something. They would have an
Yep.
interchange and then they would be able to get something. But it oftentimes, and I think even today, depending on where you are in the world, when you're, for example, maybe in the United States, you're further south and maybe in a smaller town, you'll notice there's a lot more of that creative banter, that connection piece that you mentioned earlier,
Sure.
than perhaps if you are in New York City, where you don't necessarily have that because it is, you go into any kind of restaurant, it is very much more transactional versus perhaps in a slower,
Mhm.
slower paced environment. So when you start looking at the interactions we have with the machines that we've created, you mentioned when we have these concepts of building out these interfaces that we're all used to, whether it's where we touch buttons on the screen or whether we use
Right.
move a mouse or type or something like that. You're moving towards of removing some of those physical components to go back to what's very natural to all of us, even as a child, is to be able to use our words and our actions to be able to ask
Mm.
or interchange with that. As you start blending that with the thoughts that perhaps interfacing with computers becomes more conversational, do you foresee that in fact could translate into computers leveraging a similar interface to do away with APIs, for example? Because now this
Mhm.
conversation becomes a standardish way to interact with everything that it interacts with.
Yeah. Yeah. Machines talking to each other the way we talk to each other, in a sense, either you could look at it as they add us to the conversation or we add them to our conversation. And there's probably examples of both, and it depends on your perspective. I always think of IoT, right? And you go IoT and P, which is Internet of Things and People. And you start to imagine like people are within that network, right? That idea. So, like this story, the concept of a smart tricycle, a smart car, and a smart truck, and a not so smart 2-year-old that is like driving towards their little tricycle towards an intersection, a blind intersection. Same with the car and the truck. In a world where all things speak our language, that tricycle is just basically communicating with the truck and the car saying, hey, 2-year-old on its way through the intersections, not going to stop. Right. And the truck's no problem, stops. The car, no problem, stops. We're stopped. And there goes the tricycle, right? Trying to slow down to not hurt the kid. Let's assume it's a smart tricycle as well. And so this conversation just happened, right? But also the parents could have been included in that conversation. So alert can go off and they can watch, instead of bits and bytes going on between the car and the tricycle and the truck, is a human conversation, essentially an English or language based conversation that's going on. And now the parents get to feel at ease because they know that the truck has acknowledged and the car has acknowledged the tricycle and the tricycle has warned. So at least they go out there less freaked out. And I think when we look at machines talking to machines in a more efficient way, we remove people from the conversation, which I think, yeah, great. There's certainly an efficiency of having machines talk to each other in bits and bytes and a lot faster. But I think there's an even bigger advantage to having people part of that conversation. So now machines are talking to other machines. People can get added and removed to the conversation. They can see what actually happened. And when we look at things like compliance at an enterprise level and things like that, now having anyone, have access to see what machine talked to what machine and ask for what thing and what did the machine say back very easily seems like a much bigger advantage than having this be some sort of cryptic language that we've got to decode. So I know there's folks who say it's inefficient. And I would say back that efficiency isn't the point, right? The real point is that we feel in control, and to be able to observe conversations between machines in a natural way for us, and for any human to be able to do that, gives us all a sense of control. And I think it's that control that will move us faster towards embracing automation versus fearing it.
Yeah. I
Secrets, we
seem to
don't like
recall,
secrets. Two people whisper to each other. It makes you uncomfortable, even if it's your best friends, right? It's just, you're like, I don't like this. Some things I can't hear what they're saying. I wonder what they're talking about.
I know if I think back in time to the interactions that my grandparents had, whenever they wanted to tell secrets, they would go and talk in their native language. So they would go back and talk Italian to each other, or in one case, or Ukrainian in the other. That the fact is that they're talking, I didn't understand the language. I was, doing you
Right.
good. But that's how they got around that problem of keeping secrets from me at the time, because that's how they managed it. But seem to recall that was it Facebook that had that issue where they had a couple of AIs that were talking to each other, and they
Yeah.
understood it to a certain period of time. And after a while, the computers had made up their own language that was far more efficient, and
Mm.
the researchers had no idea what they were talking about. And whether it
Right.
may have
Right.
been gibberish at that point, we don't know. But the reality is that we didn't know. And so it gets back to that.
Right.
Are we children now? Maybe, okay, going back to the movies, where you've got the AIs talking behind the scenes, and the human, we're include you when we think we need to, but no, I was going to include you. I'm going to talk. I've got other things I got to do. And you're not always going to be in every
Right.
conversation. Do we see anything along those lines where perhaps that concept of, if we had the control and manage the logging the way we do now with traditional APIs, it's efficient to a certain extent, but it's not universal. Do we run the risk of the AI system saying, I've identified a more efficient way of doing this here. I've communicated that with the other AIs that I'm in contact with, and we're going to leverage that communications as we speak to each other without necessarily including you.
Yeah. I think this is one of the ways we can dictate how the machines talk. They don't care, right?
They don't.
They're not trying to be efficient unless you tell them to be efficient. So they don't have an objective to communicate more efficiently. The only reason those two machines invented a new language is because that's what we're designed to do. They wouldn't have done it if they were designed not to do it, or just simply to do something else. So somebody designed that, right? Somebody made that the objective of these two machines, either inadvertently or on purpose. But I think if we think about this as, no, like, you're going to speak we want to be part of the conversation. The machine will do as we want. I think there's a lot of, I really question sometimes if the words AI is helpful or just a huge impediment, because when you look at this from a machine standpoint, machines are just getting smarter, and they're on a continuum of just getting smarter. We had dumb machines, and we've had machines for a long time. Tools become machines, and
Right.
machines becoming smarter over time. And I use this example a lot, which is like a skill saw that can tell the difference between fingers and a 2x4. How can that be a bad thing? That's just a machine getting smarter. Our bombs being smarter, our guns being smarter, our our cars being smarter. We've always been trying to make machines smarter so we can make them safer. And they've already been killing us for a long time. Machines are dangerous. And the dumber they are, the more dangerous they tend to be, not the smarter they are. So I think as we think of AI, one of the things that seems to go along with it is the fact that we have a sense of self. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that our brains work in a sort of single-threaded way. Imagine a multi-threaded environment. Where's the sense of self, right? So a machine has many threads. It exists in many places concurrently. So it doesn't make sense that a machine would have a sense of self, where that's something we're assigning the machine to. And it feels like when people say AI, what they're really saying is when a machine begins to have a sense of self and self-preservation, we're all in trouble. And I think that is true to a degree. If machines are designed to have a sense of self and for self-preservation, without any regard to humans and service to humans, that's dangerous. The same way that a gun on a automated tripod shoots at anything that moves. Somebody designed that. That is dangerous. And that's why it's illegal to have one of those in your house, right? You can't booby trap your house, right? So are people going to suddenly make smarter booby traps? Sure, that is always a fear, but are machines going to be programmed with a sense of self in them? Why? It doesn't make sense. It makes sense that they'll be multi-threaded, they'll exist in many places, and that their sole purpose will be at the service of humans. And that's where I think when we look at things like trying to regulate this stuff, we already have mechanisms for this. Cars and are great examples. Medicine, another great example. You can't just go invent a drug and then start selling it on the street. Like, you've got to go through a process. And I think same here, if you're going to create a machine that has a sense of self, then then you may be doing something that's illegal. And I can see that. So AI, I feel like, moves people to this maybe wrong idea that it's just a smarter machine, not a machine that replicates a human. And that's not the point. It's just that the fact that we can communicate with it more openly in the way we communicate with each other doesn't mean we're going to take that to the next level and actually turn it into a person.
So I want to key off of something you just said. I think is an interesting kind of tangent. So let's bring back Microsoft's Tay. Okay, so Tay was out there, and much on the streets where they are mixing fentanyl with whatever they could find, gasoline or whatever is out there to make it stronger. The reality is that there are people who will take this kind of technology to concentrate, not necessarily all the goodness, but concentrate many of the bad features for whatever purposes they choose to use them for or to entertain themselves with. What risks do we have and what capabilities should we build into this stuff to prevent that, or can we?
Yeah, there are risks. There's no question. Again, machines are dangerous. They've been killing us for years. Whenever I hear stuff like that, I have a hard time understanding why that's a new idea for people. So that's what search engines were for, dark web and Reddit. And come on, you could search exactly what you just said on Google and get many results. What does Google try to do to stop that? This whole concept of alignment, this concept of trying to be careful about what we feed the machine so it doesn't feed it back to us, like garbage in, garbage out idea. And I think that'll be a continuous thing. The idea of search engines being smarter, that feels like a way to protect against getting a recipe for how to do harm. I think we can already see that ChatGPT attempts to not answer those questions. And I think it does a better job than Google does and the internet as a whole does. Already, we're talking months into it, right? We're not talking years. How long have we had search engines? And it still hasn't figured that out. We have Facebook. They still haven't figured this out. So there's the idea of going back and getting rid of all machines, or we just go forward and say, let's make our search engines and our social media smarter so that we can manage this stuff better, because that's the only way out. You can't hire thousands and thousands of people to moderate content. It's not sustainable. And it's not sustainable to those people's mental health.
No.
My wife is responsible for contracts. She's a lawyer. And one of the areas she's been delving into is this idea of content moderation and the liabilities associated with what you're doing to those employees that are moderating content. This is like no place for a human brain. Very harmful. So it's possible that smarter machines is the way out of this, not further exasperating the issue. And I think that's what people don't see, is that it's just a smarter search engine that might be able to warn a kid's parents that their kid is dangerously close to buying an assault weapon far more than a search engine ever will. It's too easy to just erase your search history or hide it. So what if these things were smarter? And what if the concept of parental oversight became more intelligent and it could give insight to parents on the state of their kids mentally so that they're more engaged and more aware of what's going on. So I think we got to look for ways to fix the machines we have using this tech versus wind the clock back and say, let's get rid of machines and all live Mennonites or.
Yeah, we'll bring the Luddites team back together and get them pounding their drums. So one part of you mentioned earlier on about going to that whole lights out concept, and in your book you mentioned, but I would guess the natural progression of leveraging the technologies that currently exist now, whether that's intelligent automation and blockchain, whatever, to create these distributed automated organizations to exist for the functions they do in a lights out capability. You mentioned some of the kind of potential risks, or whatever, but are there other risks and other opportunities for allowing corporate entities to evolve into these DAOs, the distributed automated organizations?
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting about large enterprises especially is that if you really break them down from a mathematics standpoint, being heavily math oriented, I tend to often see things in mathematics, seeing the world in mathematics. And when you see a franchise or a large enterprise, you see a bunch of algorithms that tend to work broadly. So making a cheeseburger at McDonald's and the algorithm for making that, interestingly enough, hasn't changed much since the first McDonald's. And when you look at the objective of those guys, the McDonald brothers, right? It was to create these algorithms that any human could execute because they're so simple. Any human in the world that created a consistent output for humans, right? So highly repeatable everywhere. And you realize that it's every McDonald's is just a sequence of algorithms that each person in each system, each one of those McDonald's are running. And they're running it as consistently as they can. I remember I was on an airplane on the way to Ukraine a few years ago, and there was a guy, he was a bun guy. He was the bun guy for McDonald's. He goes around and he tastes the buns that the factory output to make sure that the buns taste exactly the same, no matter where you are. And he was good at his job because he could tell you what you did wrong just by tasting the bun. He also had a bun with him that was like the standard, right?
The reference bun.
The reference bun, like in his case. And I thought, wow, like these are just algorithms we're running, and we're running very generically across the world. With AI, we have this opportunity to make those algorithms more complex, more customized for their environment. So we can still run algorithms, but they can be, they can account for local ingredients, sustainability, local taste, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how large companies are able to adapt their businesses and make them more nimble by automating them. Because if you look up to now, automating your business actually made it more rigid. When you look at like business process and your IT team taking 6 months to automate something in Salesforce or some software product, and then the business says, hey, we want to change this process, it often starts with, let's get with IT and see how long it will take them to change the software so we could do this. If those business processes can evolve really quickly, we can be a lot more nimble, and each location can be more nimble. So I think looking at automation as something that's ephemeral, like the fact that you could write software for one-time use, that it can adapt to its environment, I think is super exciting for businesses. And then it comes down to, of course, not automating what you do, but what you should do. It's the employee that wants that's sick and says, hey, I'm going to be out for a few days. What does that experience look like? Most people that I've interacted with will automate that as, oh, it just lets everybody know they're going to be sick. But in my world, that system says, oh, I'm going to make sure that you have coverage. So I'm going to make sure that there's somebody there to cover for you. You don't have to worry about that. You can just worry about getting better. It can pass around through messaging, like a get well card that your fellow employees could just sign and say, hey, I hope you're feeling better, with a little note, personal note, not the AI writing the note for people, but a personal note from them. And then it could put it in the mail using an API, ideally one that in the future speaks English, or at least speaks the language, and puts it in the mail. And then on your second or third day, receiving a postcard from your peers just wishing you well. And that's just something we wouldn't think of today, because that's just too much work, right? That's every time someone's sick or goes on vacation, or we don't have the resources to cost effectively pull that off. But now with automation, we can have the automation do the heavy lifting and still have the human in the loop.
So it's interesting you brought up the McDonald's kind of an example, because if you think about that, there are certain standardized things that they, as a franchisee, that you're obligated to follow the rules to be able to produce that output, which is why you have Bun Guy going around making sure that you are, right? So he's the audit. So when you look at that and you build in the concept that, I think it was, just been recently now, that somewhere in the Dallas area, they open up their first fully automated McDonald's restaurant. So now you have this concept where these algorithms of creating the food are being managed and maintained in a way that they are done with mechanical precision now. So you've combined both of those concepts of standardization because we want a consistent taste, but also standardization in a way that we can guarantee that every single time it will be exactly the same because we have engineered it that way. So building those things into that kind of process. So it sounds like we can have some of the evolution, which will naturally benefit maybe us as consumers. I can go to that particular Dallas drive-through and get exactly the same French fries, exactly the same hamburger kind of thing that I would get somewhere else, and it would taste exactly the same because it's supposed to. But you also have the capabilities of then rolling out new algorithms, as you were mentioning before, to adapt and change. So if I wanted to bring the McRib back, we load another machine and we can add as an adaptive capability this new algorithm, McRib algorithm, to be able to do that same thing at the same time, or do something different, as you mentioned, maybe from a different flavor profile, depending on where you're at.
Yeah.
So the concept of creating the automations with the eye towards flexibility now is the best of both worlds. I've got the standardized automated version, but I also have the flexibility of changing the algorithms as I need to support whatever that is that we want to do to make those changes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we get rid of these hybrid environments that are like half productivity and half experiential. Walking into a McDonald's, I don't know if that's an experience or if I'm a cow. I'm not really sure what's happening there. But what I like is this idea that says, look, if you're in a hurry and this is a productivity oriented experience, you're just looking to get the food and get out, or even better, have it delivered. Because I think when we look at full automation, I didn't have to leave my house. It's just ding dong, it's at the door.
Good point.
It comes to me. I think we look at companies like that having very distinctive, clear experience differentials between fully automated, like this is productivity, I just need food, I just want this food and I want it fast, I'm in a hurry, to a fully experiential where you're walking in to experience sitting down, eating food, and you don't have the hustle bustle kitchen and the person that's in a hurry talking on the microphone at the same time as they're trying to take your order and trying to really get you through quickly, right? I want to talk to a person, but not a person that's annoyed or in a hurry to get rid of me. So if that could be architected to be experiential, which is where I really think it's going, then they're not in the back and that you don't have the factory feeling that you have when you walk up to the counter. You have somebody that's just there to help enable an experience of coming into a place, eating and experiencing the place, experiencing the people, experiencing the person you might be eating with, co-creating, right? And you don't have a person that's taking your order that's just repeating the same thing to you as they've said to the last 100,000 people that they've talked to. So I think you now have these businesses creating these distinctions very clearly and saying, okay, one, we're going to focus on the experience. The other, we're going to go all in on the automation. We're just going to drop it on your door. And I like this idea. I don't find the hybrid particularly enjoyable personally. I like to go to those small restaurants that are very welcoming and social when experience is what I'm looking for. And then, when I just want food fast, ideally drop it off at my door or let me just drive through and have it ready for me. I don't even want to stand in a line, right? I just want to roll down the window and have them throw it at me as I drive by.
So do you see a combination? You said hybrid probably won't work. I would agree with that in terms of the experience versus automation, because it doesn't lend itself well to that. But do you see a potential where organizations, and I know we've been using the restaurant because it's real easy to visualize and understand this, so maybe we'll keep on that, where you sit down to your experiential dinner, where you have someone who comes up or you leverage AI or make your order, and it's very welcoming and pleasant to you in this interaction where you're deciding how you want to eat today, deciding that, but in the background, in the actual kitchen itself, there's magic happening that you could care less if it's automated or not, because in fact, if it is automated, perhaps they'll have all the right ingredients there. They'll have them all cooked at the right temperatures, et cetera. there's going to be that capability of distinguishing between what's important, the customer experience, versus what's less important to the customer experience, which is the efficiency to be able to produce the customer experience that you're looking for. Because I think at all point in times, we're going to have this, there's always going to be a craft aspect to something or other, where I want to go to a restaurant where I have someone cooking for me in front of me. I've gone to these little Japanese style restaurants where they're doing the hibachi right in front of you. And it's a experience in that there's a show, there's an experience in that there's food, there's the smells, the excitement, the fun, the interaction with people around you. That's a type of thing that people are going to look at and say, what would you automate there? Who would want to automate that? That's part of the fun. That's part of the experience that I want to have, is not being automated. But in those other areas, do you think there's a balance that an organization can strike outside the food industry, where they have this capability of delighting their customers with personalized experience, yet offering this more active automation behind the scenes to be able to enable that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, first of all, you got to think about training employees, right? And going, does that change? Because at McDonald's or any factory or any business, a lot of the training is about repeating the task flawlessly over and over again.
Yeah.
Do this exact way. So trying to turn us into machines, really. And maybe that training changes to becoming more about how to engage with people better, how to make the experience of being a customer more welcoming to people. So we look at retraining employees to being more friendly, more conversational, and more creative in terms of how they improve the experience. I think when you extend that beyond just customer, I think a lot of us always admire a company that's customer first. But I've come to admire companies that are more employee first, customer second, shareholder third. I think there's a lot of data to support that happy customers make for happy employees make for happy customers, and happy customers make for happy shareholders. And when you focus on shareholder first, it's a bit of a short-term problem that you end up focusing on. And so when we think about automation and we go, how do we start with improving the employee experience, which gets them in the right frame of mind to thinking and crafting about how they can improve the customer experience, then I think we realize there's a lot of room for improvement as we automate. There's just a lot of things we're not doing that we ought to be doing. I think I haven't met an HR person that didn't get into HR because they wanted to help people and connect with people, and then found that the job was really about administration, and that they don't find themselves actually having time to make the experience of being an employee better, that they find that all they're doing is answering questions as quickly as they can and doing a lot of administrative tasks. So what if they could do what they were actually trained to do, what they were promised the job was about? And that automation could do those administrative tasks, and that can trickle down. And why does automation fall down for most companies? It's because of that static nature. If you can't automate quickly, if you can't change your automation, if it's not nimble, then you're still going to need heavy reliance on human labor. That idea of training machines is critical. When you look at the human brain, like, we can learn pretty fast. We're not always great at executing consistently. In fact, that's a weakness. And I know this from doing some work on the Boeing 787. I was part of the team that designed the cockpit. And we look at what it is to train a pilot. It's about under stress being able to run tasks flawlessly, right? We learn with chess that it's about not making mistakes. It's mistakes that cause you to lose. It's running those plays flawlessly. Tennis, it's those strokes and hitting those strokes flawlessly. Like, they're just practicing to hit those strokes perfectly each time. And it's the person with the most errors that loses, and the person with the least errors that wins. And so I think if we can let machines do that, we all focus on making employee experience better, which then they focus on making customer experience better. And then we just level the bar up. And there's this concept of lights out. It's a red herring. We don't need lights out. We go to work to create. If you're lucky, we'll keep going to work because we keep needing to create.
So do you see if an organization is successful in doing that, do you see that would allow their employees to feel more connected to the organization? Because I know we've seen over the past, past the COVID time, we had this whole great resignation thing, and now organizations are laying people off and whatnot. So there seems to be still a transactional nature, which may be built in because of the fact that we're not allowing humans to do what they do best. Do you see a transition though, if we go where we have an employee first culture leveraging AI or automation to support that? Do you think that people will react differently to work in general?
Yeah, I think you could say that in a sense, the concept of a company is a bit anthropomorphic, right? Having a connection to a company is not a person. It's a thing. It's a legal
It's a
structure.
tribe.
Yeah, ultimately, but at the same time, the company itself, the name, right? It's just a legal entity. There's no connectivity to a thing. It's anthropomorphic in a way, especially with a lot of the branding techniques that we use to try to make it feel real, like a real person and has a personality. You're connected to the people you work with, not the company. And
Yeah.
if I'm too busy stamping license plates or doing whatever repetitive task I am doing to engage with the people around me, and granted, let's face it, these were random people selected to be my friends by, some manager that may not even be there anymore. But let's just say that an AI actually was responsible for choosing these people and that its primary objective was compatibility with me and the people I work with, not productivity, but compatibility. And that now I have time to be connected to those people and we co-create together because frankly, we have to, because machines will create generic content and generic ideas. So generic ideas aren't good enough. And in order to come up with original thought, it's better we do this as a team. We're going to need teams, just like sitcoms are written by writing teams, and really creative shows like Saturday Night Live they need writing teams to work together. So now I need to co-create with my team to beat the AI because it's only capable of generic stuff. So we will beat it, right? We will win because we can be original and it can't. By its sheer nature of mathematics, it's not original. So we co-create, we bond together. I will be connected to those people. I will be connected to that company through those people. We'll go through this together. So I do believe that indirectly, automation frees us up. The competition with machines raises the bar on creativity. No longer mediocrity be okay. And that will force us to have to work together more to come up with those great ideas. And like I said earlier, like we synthesize, we mind meld. When we start brainstorming, we start to connect even our frequency and voice. So that connectivity, when we're jamming and coming up with ideas and iterating on each other's ideas, that could be work. How great and fun would that be if we were all in a room, just like Saturday Night Live, writing, eating pizza and making jokes?
I think I'd sign up for that one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty utopian. I get it.
It gives you
It's
something to
worth
look at, look
chasing,
forward
right?
to, though. Exactly. It gives you something to look
Yeah.
forward to, that viewpoint. So speaking of that, so you're providing inspiration for a whole lot of folks listening in. What drives you? What inspires you as you look towards the future and the creation of things that you're building right now to help enable that utopian future?
Yeah. I think coming from the film industry, I understood the value of creativity in a world where you had to make money at it, right? Finding that balance. It couldn't be purely a selfish endeavor, right? You couldn't just do what you wanted when you wanted. At the end of the day, you had to produce something and it had to be something people liked and it was highly competitive. The jokes had to be funny.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to laugh at them out of politeness. So the bar was set high for creativity in that space. And it was a unique environment that fostered a high level of creativity. productivity, and seeing how we can bring that to business and how that could exist in everything we do is exciting. And we definitely were a strong team. We worked long hours, we worked very hard, but there was a lot of connectivity in that industry. So I'd love to bring that feeling that I got to feel for a decade to the rest of the world. And I think I've been able to recreate that at OneReach. If you talk to the folks that work here, you will get a sense of closeness between them. It's applying that. I had somebody at Microsoft when I was at Warner Brothers following me around for 6 weeks with a pen and paper, trying to figure out how they could just replicate what we were doing. Obviously, that's not how, but I'd love to see people being able to be creative for a living and enjoying it, and also achieving a high level of excellence like Hollywood does.
Yeah, I can see that. And I want to thank you for bringing your unique perspective to this topic of automation and hyperautomation and AI. Because again, I feel like this discussion we just had reflects very well on the book, which is really talking about people and in a technology background. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I will leave a link to the book in the show notes for folks who are interested, because I believe this is a very powerful book that you should read to get a better feel for how automation and people work well together. So Robb, thank you so much again for joining us on Transform Now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.